Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. You may note from my background, everyone, that I'm back in Washington in our office right by the Supreme Court. It's good to be back. There's a lot going on. We're going to be discussing the latest developments from Washington on the UFO UAP issue in a moment. But before we do that, I want to pause and remind ourselves of what's going on in Gaza. There's a synchronicity of events over the past week that I think we need to draw together in order for us to take in the gravity of what's going on with Israel's war on Gaza. 2 days ago, January 27th, marked the 79th anniversary of that day in 1945 when Russian troops liberated Auschwitz. And since that time, formalized by the United Nations in 2007, the world has demarcated January 27th as Holocaust Remembrance Day. On the same day, on Saturday and Sunday, in Israel, there was a major conference called Victory for Israel in Jerusalem that was dedicated to the resettlement of Gaza after all the Palestinians have been eliminated. It was attended by 12 ministers in the Netanyahu government, including Ben Gvir, the Minister of National Security, and the Minister of Finance, Schmotmek. Steve, you want to keep your video off and yourself on mute till we finish here. And to 20 or so members of the Knesset all attended this conference and talking about what Gaza would look like if there were no more Palestinians and it had been resettled by Jewish settlers. One of the ministers talked about the meaning of voluntary immigration as the Israelis are speaking about it, and talked about how the Israeli army had to create the conditions so that the Palestinians were willing to be deported. It's worth remembering what the Germans did to the Jews in the 1930s and in the early 1940s before they began the final solution of the gas chambers. The Warsaw Ghetto is a classic case in point. Like the Israelis have done with the Palestinians in Gaza, they brought the Jews into ghettos. They then treated them so deplorably, cutting off water, cutting off electricity, cutting off sanitation, cutting off most of the food, till the Jews were literally starving, afflicted by disease. So At the end of 1941 and the beginning of 1942, when the Germans came and started the deportations to the death camps, they offered the Jews 30 grams of bread and 1 gram of jam if they would volunteer for deportation. They had so many people willing to volunteer for deportation because they were starving to death, that the trains were always full with hundreds of people waiting to get in. That's how the Germans did it. They starved them. They beat them. They treated them so cruelly that the deportation, even to a death camp, was welcome. And that's exactly what the Israelis are doing today in Gaza. And they celebrated that on the very day that they remembered the Holocaust. It's worth remembering that when the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, representing the United States, made his first trip to the Middle East after the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas, what did he do? He didn't try to solve the problem. He tried to get Egypt and Jordan to accept Palestinian refugees, and they wouldn't even meet with him. And then when Joe Biden, the president, went a few days later, the Arabs boycotted a meeting with Biden. So what has the United States and Israel been doing? They've been going throughout Africa and Latin America, trying to find countries that would receive Palestinians who would volunteer to be deported. And they have been systematically creating the same conditions for the Palestinians that the Germans created for them nearly 100 years ago. They've cut off water. They've cut off communication. They've cut off the food and humanitarian relief to such an extent that it's estimated that 90% of the Gazans are hungry, and between 25 and 30% of all the Palestinians in Gaza are starving. It's estimated by the United Nations that 80% of all the people in the world today who are starving or experiencing acute hunger live in Gaza. We're witnessing a level of genocide that the world hasn't seen since the Holocaust. And it's happening on Holocaust Remembrance Day. Think about this. January 27th is Holocaust Remembrance Day. January 27th is when they had the Victory for Israel conference in Jerusalem, supported by the Prime Minister, to which 12 of his ministers attended, talking about the forced deportation of Palestinians so Israeli settlers can turn it into a garden. The week before, the International Court of Justice upheld the South African charges against Israel for genocide and gave the Israeli government 30 days to report back on how they're stopping the activities that contribute to the genocide of the Palestinians. There is something, my friends, desperately wrong with the house of Israel. And we all have to take that in. It is a stain and a scar on the Jewish conscience and history and tradition of equal magnitude to the stain and the scar on the German psyche for what they did. And if Benjamin Netanyahu is the new Adolf Hitler and his government are the Nazis, it is Joe Biden who is the willing executioner, because all the weapons, all the bombs, all the bullets, including the gas that the Israelis are putting down into the tunnels, says made in USA. So I'm going to make a very strong statement, which I'm going to be expanding on Wednesday, because I'm going to talk about this again, because we cannot let this happen. If the world stands by while Israel does to the Palestinians what the Germans did to the Jews, we forfeit our right to be called civilized human beings. And I, for one, am taking a stand to say that. And I would say, in terms of Joe Biden, that he is guilty, along with Netanyahu, of crimes against humanity and should be removed and charged in a court of law for what he is doing. Because what the US government is guilty of is the rhetoric of moderation, while not only giving the Israelis all the munitions they need to finish the job, but blocking any attempt by literally the rest of the world. In the last Security Council vote, it was only the United States that blocked the ceasefire. Even the UK and France abstained. So Joe Biden is guilty of crimes against humanity and should be arrested along with Benjamin Netanyahu and charged for that and removed from office. There are many people who say that Trump is so bad, we can't, under any circumstances, let Trump become president. But with Gaza and with active, intentional participation in genocide, Joe Biden and the government of the United States has crossed a moral line that has to be called out. Because genocide is not a crime against politics. Genocide is a crime against morality itself. We're in a world where the US and the Israeli governments are calling genocide the right of self-defense. They ridicule any calls for a ceasefire as an appeasement, like Chamberlain did with Hitler in 1938. Any criticism of Israel is called anti-Semitism. Right now, today, the latest polls in Israel indicate that over 2/3 of the Israeli public believe that the government is not being forceful enough. Another less than a third think that they're doing basically the right thing. Only 2% of the Israeli public believe that the Israeli government is using too much force. Those same statistics applied in Germany with the rise of the Nazis. Overwhelming public support. What we are seeing in Israel, like we saw in Germany, is the rise of the archetype of frenzy and hatred and war. Carl Jung called it the archetype of Wotan, the god of the Teutonic pantheon that stalked the skies with thunderbolts and lightning, killing indiscriminately. And that archetype grew up and seized the German psyche. It's done it again to the House of Israel. And it's done it again to the Biden administration. They're in the grip of a hysteria that is causing them to run headlong into the sea of blood. So as we contemplate these things, my friends, all of us, every single one of us needs to take a stand. Because Israel and the United States have taken the world into a reality of genocide live streamed 24/7 on TV. And if we don't stop it, we will get a new world order, but not the new world order of globalization and transhumanism and goods in every shelf. We're going to get a new world order where major countries understand they can do anything they want with impunity. So in memory of the Holocaust, in memory of all those people who have suffered and died, whether it's in Cambodia or Yugoslavia or Rwanda or Armenia, let us take a stand about what's happening in Gaza. It is a crime against humanity. And it has to stop. And the US government and Israeli governments won't stop until there's such a surge of public opinion and outrage that they're compelled to. And that's our job. Sometimes Humanity Rising is about embracing the future. And sometimes Humanity Rising is about rejecting the perpetual repetition of the past. I know I've spoken strongly today, but history is speaking very strongly today. And in a moment here, I'm going to put in the chat, a speech that was released by Chris Hedges, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist of the New York Times, about what he called the death of Israel. That's what we're witnessing. And the extraordinary thing is that Hamas and the Palestinians have endured and are now being embraced all over the world as the new champions of humanitarian values and the right of any oppressed people to defend themselves. I stand with the Palestinians in the awareness that in my own heart lie the same seeds of genocide and the same seeds of love that battle in the hearts of every single human being. And to watch the Israelis and the Jews be caught up in the same frenzy that gripped the Germans and commit the same crimes against humanity weakens all of us in building those moral fibers that are required to keep our atavistic instincts intact and repressed. So I do not say what I'm saying today in condemnation of anybody, unless it's condemnation of all of us, in the conviction that if we can look at it squarely in the eye, we can liberate ourselves so that when this carnage is done, the whole world will repent of genocide forever until it becomes a relic of the human past and no longer a venom that generation by generation infects the human soul. I'll leave it at that today, but I'm going to return to these themes on Wednesday so that we can contemplate the gravity of what's being played out and the seriousness of the transgressions that are taking place before our very eyes. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining Humanity Rising. Sometimes we celebrate, sometimes we mourn, sometimes we explore, sometimes we question, sometimes we comment. And sometimes, as we have today, we take a stand because that's all there's left to do. I would like to now turn to our subject at hand. And thank you for indulging me speaking out as I needed to speak today in the aftermath of Holocaust Remembrance Day. One of our major issues is the arrival into human consciousness of the extraterrestrials. We are now dealing with a world after disclosure, given the legislation by the US Congress last December. I would like to invite my good friend and colleague, who I've gotten to know very well here in Washington, Steve Bassett. He is the founder of the Paradigm Research Group that has been working on UFO, UAP disclosure for many, many decades. He convened citizen hearings back in 2013 and 2014. More recently, last year, he's co-founder of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. He's been active on the pathway and the front lines of disclosure for as long as just about anybody. And so, Steve, thank you for joining. And if you could open up your video, take yourself off mute, I know given the gravity of what I just talked about, you may want to make your own comment, but we're wanting to hear from Steve after whatever comment he'd like to make about what's going on in Washington and latest developments as we continue our exploration of that particular domain. Thank you, everybody. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Jim. Okay. That was an initial opening to the thing today that I didn't expect, but I'm more than prepared to put it in context with what's going on. Let me see if I can do that. I'm reminded of a classic phrase that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And we are, of course, seeing history rhyming every day as we move into the 21st century. And what we are clearly seeing is that the experiences of the 20th century and all the awfulness that took place, in spite of a much greater awareness of the possibilities for human existence, the rise, I think, of what we'll call an enlightened concepts, where more and more people were embracing the fact that there's other ways to run governments and interact on a planet that's becoming increasingly crowded with people and increasingly complex, as well as more and more dangerous. It's been an interesting ride the last 124 years. But nevertheless, regardless of what we've learned from history, we are doing exactly the same things over and over and over again. And that is war, genocide, destruction. We just can't stop. And right now, the examples of this rhyming is pretty clear to us. Jim described one particularly egregious example. The Ukraine war is another, which has the potential to explode into what could be a nuclear event or nuclear war. The other situation that Jim is talking about is certainly set the potential for a terrorist act. It's like handing out a ticket. You know, here's a ticket. You've been thinking about doing something really, really awful. Okay, here's your ticket to do it. And it's already being anticipated. A major terrorist event is probably going to happen soon. And by a major terrorist event, I'm talking at the level of 9/11 or worse. Meanwhile, there are genocides going on in Northern Africa, in Darfur and the surrounding countries. There's been a massive loss of human life and civilian life in Yemen in that civil war. And is the UN doing anything about it? No. Are the various nations really coming together to prevent this awful loss of life? No. We are still on the road to hell, folks. And the nuclear event, which is inevitable, will be our punishment. And it will punish all, rich, the poor, smart, dumb, whatever your religion, whatever your race, everybody gets screwed. That nuclear war. Just a few days ago, on January the 23rd, the doomsday clock, which has been managed since 1947 by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, did something I didn't expect. I thought surely they would move the clock closer to midnight. They had moved it the closest ever about 2 years ago, 90 seconds, for obvious reasons. It started at 7 minutes to midnight in 1947. But for whatever reason, they just kept it at 90 seconds. But they made the point in their press releases and coverage that took place that still 90 seconds is really bad, and we're keeping it there because things are still really bad. So what has this got to do with the ET issue? everything to do with the ET issue. Which is to say that from 47 on, in spite of all the proxy wars, I don't know how many wars there have been since then. It's been many, many dozens, if not scores of wars have taken place. Millions have died, and that's after the war to end all wars. And I'll even give them I'll even throw in the Korean Wars, like, well, that was inevitable. It's going to come from World War II, and you're going to have that. But after the Korean War, we're thinking, okay, folks, it's a good opportunity. Let's stop this, right? Because it's so destructive. But no, we've had proxy wars and proxy wars and proxy wars. Narcissistic, megalomaniac, sociopaths have continued to work their way up and become rulers of countries and do what sociopaths do. Is there a way out of this? Is it possible that just enough good people will come together and exert so much force on government that the government must yield to their good intentions, their wisdom? Can we overwhelm this with kindness? We need to try. We need to certainly expand what we'll call the understanding that people have that we need to change, and all of that. All of this is important, and it's going on. But it is enough? No. When I say history rhymes, I mean it rhymes. And the continuance of the worst of human nature is moving forward like a juggernaut. What could possibly stop this juggernaut? Can we be like that young fellow with the grocery bag in his hand that stood in front of what actually was a long line of 100+ Chinese tanks and stop them and then climb up on one of them? No. Those tanks are going to roll right over you. As it happens, not much came of that, and that fellow disappeared, but it's going to take something big. And we have that. We have that something. But it's complicated. So the ET engagement, which escalates in 1947, is by now, based on what we know, absolutely connected to the atomic bombs dropped in Japan and the development of atomic weapons and the nuclear arms race and so forth, that of course made the world increasingly dangerous. There is a connection between these two. I believe I know where that connection goes and where this is supposed to end up. It's supposed to end up with a formal acknowledgement by heads of state worldwide that we're not alone, we're being engaged. Yes, we have tech, yes, we have bodies and so forth. We know this, we know that, and what have you, but at least that becomes reality. We're not the only species in the galaxy with technology. That's big. But after disclosure, I think a certain length of time will pass and we will get into open contact. And so this is so big, so profound, so changing, so paradigm shifting, that it, like nothing else I can even imagine, has the power to start changing worldview in a way that people can actually look and consider, maybe we don't want to continue acting the way we do, slaughtering the way we do. Racial wars, ethnic wars, just basic wars, right? For whatever the reason, willing to go and slaughter people because you want this piece of territory or that piece of territory. It's big enough to possibly stop that. But here's the problem. A policy of embargo that has been led by the United States government with the support of its allies since 1947, and also with the compliance for their own reasons of the autocratic nations, particularly the Soviet Union and, of course, communist China at the time, and now Russia, is still in place, preventing that announcement, that confirmation. But in the last 7 years, we have made extraordinary progress. Things have happened that are unprecedented. And you don't have time today to go through that history. I gave that history to you the last time I talked with you all. But I need to give you an update, because while we were making very, very important progress, and the platform and the structure was being set up to support a presidential confirmation from our current president, whatever his flaws, whatever his assets or negatives, whatever, he is the president and he's the one that has to confirm it. Suddenly, we've had a little resistance, blowback, pushback, whatever you want to call it, which is in one sense amusing, and in the other sense pathetic. And here is what's happened. I referred to a classic canard that most of you have heard. Nothing focuses one's attention like knowing they're going to hang in the morning. When Senator Schumer and Senator Rounds, one a Democrat, one a Republican, and I assure you, Senator Rounds and Senator Schumer are not traveling in the same political theory zone. It's quite a bit of difference there, but they work together. And on July the 14th, they announced that they were submitting extraordinary new legislation into what would be the fourth UAP legislation passed by the United States Congress. The first one was passed in a major bill, the COVID 2 trillion dollar rescue bill. Put some language in there. That was Marco Rubio. And then very substantive language was put in the next National Defense Appropriations Act, a major bill. And then again in the National Defense Appropriations Act, a major bill. And this was going to go into the 2024 FY National Defense Appropriations Bill. In other words, these UAP legislations are not some standalone vanity projects. They're being embedded in a major bill that has to be passed every year. Okay, fine. And the fourth one had some language already up and in play in July of last year. And then Chuck Schumer went in front of the press, like a press conference, and stated, my friend, good friend, Mike Rounds and I have put together 50, I think it was around 55 pages of additional legislation that we want in this bill, and we have submitted it and put it up on the website. And what he announced was game-changing. It was extraordinary. What Rounds and Schumer had put together was essentially the rest of the package needed to prepare our country and our people to be told by the United States president, you're not alone in the universe, folks. We got visitors. We've even got some of their tech, got some of their bodies, and you're going to want to know more, and we're going to help you find out more, and thus we're in the post-disclosure world, right? It was an extraordinary bill. It had it all. First of all, it was called the UAP Disclosure Act. Thank you, Senator Schumer. It included the UAP Disclosure Plan. And this plan had it all. It had the powers and the process that would allow or prepare for the orderly bringing forward of everything the United States government has and knows and has done on the ET issue into the public domain, declassified and made public. Not the next day after the bill was passed, but starting shortly after the bill was passed, and would go on for undoubtedly years, and much would come forward, some would be held back, and the process would be consistent, and it would be oversaw, it would be fine. It created a presidential review panel that would have subpoena power and the highest level classification to be able to listen to or engage any aspect of the secret world. It gave classification status at the same level to certain members of Congress who would be in oversight positions on this, all right? It provides subpoena power to all of these individuals and certain committees, so that if it was necessary that they wanted to talk to somebody, not to harass them, but rather that would just like to talk to you, and that person said, I work in a USAP, go to hell, They could say, oh, no, 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 you've been subpoenaed. You don't show up, you're going to go to jail. Gave them that power. And then it did something else. It included one other thing. And this was important for the reason I'm about to tell you. This omnibus package that basically provided the entire basis to empty out the secret files and the secret projects on this issue in time from the US government and put before the world included an eminent domain clause that said, implied, or legally made appropriate, that the government, in fact, was declaring it does have eminent domain on the technology that had been referred to, not just by David Grush, by others going back decades. Decades. David Grush is not the only person that has discussed, engaged, and learned about the fact that the U.S. has crashed extraterrestrial beings. Again, extraterrestrial, and call them non-human all day long. They're extraterrestrial from other planets. There's untold trillions of them out there, folks. And so what he did there was put a massive shot across the bow of the military intelligence complex on this issue. He finally did something that none of my colleagues and myself and others have been able to do. He made the disclosure process for those who control and manage it, or affected by it, or dealing with it inside government, real. In other words, it was suddenly real. They are going to do this. It is going to happen. And that's what I mean by focusing one's attention. He got their attention. And for the first time, really since 1969, frankly, they decided to take action. Now, very briefly, 1969 is when the United States government had gotten fed up with all the interest that the public was giving to this issue and all the demands and what have you, and all the problems that NICAP, a very important organization filled with thousands of pretty substantial people, and having to do all the studies in Blue Book on and on and on with no intention of resolving the issue. They decided, look, this is just too much. This public need to know, right to know crap is just really irritating us. And so we got to wrap this up. And so they made some pretty slick maneuvers back then at a time when they could get away with those maneuvers. And what they did was assign a study to Dr. Edward Condon at the University of Colorado. And Dr. Edward Condon, his name starting with Con, it's kind of appropriate, produced a complete bogus report designed not to learn or reveal anything true, but in fact, to support the basis for the United States government to end Project Blue Book, which was becoming a real problem for them. And that report was an absolute disgrace to Dr. Condon and the University of Colorado, which hasn't apologized for it yet. And just getting a better football team is not sufficient. And of course, that legacy is going to have to be accounted for someday. And so then they closed down Blue Book, which was also becoming a problem because one of the lead investigators, Dr. Alan Hynek, a hero, was clearly demonstrating that he wasn't buying into their game, that he is starting to realize that this thing was essentially for show and wasn't happy about it. And they're thinking, oh my God, Condon's turning against us, whatever, we got to shut all this down. And so they did. And at the same time, NICAP had to be destroyed because NICAP was a serious problem for them too. And the work of James McDonald, who also needed to be destroyed and was destroyed. He committed suicide. And this process that they were going through to wrap this up and the way that he was, how would you say, diminished and attacked and possibly even harassed, helped him to commit suicide. And so there they were. They were free. No Blue Book, no NICAP, got the nice Condon report. So this whole need to know, right to know crap that keeps coming up about the people wanting to know about this, we can just forget about it and move on to whatever we have planned in the future, which is, of course, more wars. From this 1969, more destruction, more stupidity. Kind of worked, but now, not totally, because the ETs are still here. They were still in the sky, flying around. They knew about it. They've known about it since 47. So they weren't going to go away, right? So guess what? Literally at the same time, the Blue Book is being destroyed. MUFON arises to take NICAP's place. And why NICAP was able to kind of linger on, on its deathbed for a few more years until the tubes were pulled, MUFON comes together and starts developing a national and ultimately worldwide organization to kind of do what NICAP was doing. Well, MUFON is still here, 54 years later, and it's bigger than ever. It's developed a very significant media component, which is the work of Ron James. It's hired a fairly substantial lobbying firm, a real lobbying firm where people get paid and they have resources, and they're lobbying on this issue for MUFON. Other individuals have signed up as lobbyists. I have for some time not been the only registered lobbyist. And because some of the people that are signing up have far more resources than I, they're really getting some progress up there while I work on other things. Right. So again, it wasn't going to ultimately work, but it delayed it. It pushed it off. And so 69, 79, 89, whatever, we go through another 50 years, but the issue never went away. The research never stopped, and the activism started picking up in 2000. And so as we arrive to now, right, the Schumer bill that was submitted, Schumer-Rounds bill, was a major event. And it made it real, and it forced them for the first time since 69 to really finally push back. This is mostly like a desperation attempt, a fight or flight kind of thing, in which those that are in that, part of that embargo are faced with the fact that they may soon have to answer for it. They may have to take questions. They may have to deal with it. It's going to be publicly known, and they are scared to death. Many of them, not all of them. They don't want to have to answer for this. They want to just have it stay the same until they retire and die or whatever. But they're realizing, oh my God, it's happening now. And here's what they did. First of all, they had to get rid of that eminent domain language. And if possible, get rid of all of the powers that were in that bill, the subpoena, right, powers, the high levels of classification, that UAP review board, if they could get rid of all of it. And so the defense contractors went to their lobbyists and they said, go gut that bill. Well, how you do that? What are you going to do? Protest in front of the Congress? The Capitol building? No. You do what you do. The lobbyists go to individuals in the Congress who get huge donations from the defense contracting world to win their elections. And believe me, they get millions. Now, as it happens, the Republicans get more of that money than the Democrats, but the Democrats get plenty of defense contractor money. And not surprisingly, they targeted two very powerful Republicans who get lots of donations from them appropriately, because one, Mike Turner, is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and one, Mike Rogers, is the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. Very powerful persons with very much connection to the national security structures who get lots of money from defense contractors. And they basically said, go to the people, the House people, particularly the House Republicans, that are in the conference, in the reconciliation conference, working to create the final language, and gut that bill. I wasn't sure they could pull it off. But then we learned, and by the way, it took a month or so before we started to get any indication of this. This was being done very behind the scenes for weeks and weeks after Schumer made the announcement. And so now we're getting October, and we learned that Mitch McConnell has jumped on board as well. Now, Mitch McConnell is a powerful person in the Senate. And so now they've got his attention. I think Mitch McConnell probably gets a lot of donations from the defense contractor industry, just speculating here. And so now McConnell is going to members of the Senate that are in the reconciliation process and saying, gut that bill. They gutted it. They took all the powers out. They weren't so bold as to just completely eliminate it, right? So they left the essence of the bill, which is the fundamental disclosure process, that will ultimately have to take place one day when this embargo ends. But they took all the powers away in terms of the Congress and the oversight realm to help it happen. And they put that power literally in the hands of the people holding the secrets, deep down in those underground bunkers or behind, levels and levels of classification. It was absolutely transparent. He forced them out of cover, Senator Schumer did. He forced them to do something they've never wanted to do because everybody knew what was happening. Everybody knew that these were the people, the defense contractors, who were having to pull that out. Why? And this is the cool part. You don't push back against that bill if you don't have non-human tech and non-human bodies, as Grush correctly told us and others have told us. You don't do that. We got nothing. What do you want? Fine, come get it. We don't have anything. There's no ETs here. There's no ET tech. You only push back because you do. And when Schumer put that language in the bill, he personally essentially said, of course we have non-human tech and non-human bodies. Otherwise, why in the hell would I put this bill together with eminent domain to go claim something that doesn't exist? And so it's hard to find anybody in Washington now who has it in one way or another confirm that, yes, we have non-human tech. And so this is a big deal. So they may have gutted the bill of the powers, but the idea that non-human tech is absolutely in possession actually was reinforced by these actions. So it's a setback. It's not a big deal. And Schumer went immediately in Congress and did one of those presentations, which there's no audience there, but it's being filmed. And he put in the record that, well, he's sorry and a little sad that they pushed back so hard and stripped that language out. But the basic bill is there. He's proud of that. And they plan to keep on pushing until we can get this structure together and so forth. Okay, great. And of course, what he did and the pushback that came from the contractors and others to gut the bill did not in any way prevent the Senate Intelligence Committee from holding hearings, that witnesses are ready to testify. Witnesses, many Grushes, right, to stand with Grush, who would also testify. Not one, not two, 20, 30, as many as they want. They're ready to be testified. And that testimony will blow the truth embargo to smithereens and set the stage for the president to disclose. Now, the Senate Intel Committee hasn't done that, in spite of the fact that I really asked them very many times to do this, pleaded with them, whatever, through podcasts. They haven't done it. They're just kind of locked up. They don't know what to do. Okay. Then what happened? Now, what's recently happened is non-trivial. All right. Two things. First, Sean Kirkpatrick quit the AARO, All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, and went on a jihad. He was a very angry guy. He writes a letter or puts an article in the Scientific American in which he pretty much attacks everybody. He's mad, he's pissed, and he's blaming this and he's blaming that, and he's making various claims and so forth. And it's unfortunate. Sean Kirkpatrick probably has done the worst thing that he's ever done in his career, and he's going to come to regret that Scientific American piece and regret it for the rest of his life. And I have actually a lot of empathy for him. Not surprisingly, just a few days after that, the DOD Inspector General decides this would be a good time, in service of transparency, we promise transparency, to release the IG Inspector General, DOD Inspector General study review of how things were going with AARO and so forth. And that comes out, and it's essentially kind of a pushback. It doesn't really reveal anything other than complaining in great measure that they have learned that the United States government across the military services and other agencies has not got some sort of overarching plan to deal with this thing, this potential alien thing. You know, they're not doing this and they're not doing that. I'm going, okay. and then in the process raises the issue that ends up getting picked up by the press that the Earth is not prepared to deal with an alien invasion. What? Okay, well, first of all, so you've got basically at the same time, you have Kirkpatrick saying, look, there is a cabal of people, many of them inside, who are a bunch of true believers, and they have been orchestrating all of this all along, and there's no substance to it. I invite you to read that South American article, South Scientific American piece by Kirkpatrick. It is sad. It is painful to read, right? And at the same time, the IG report is put out to kind of show that, again, there's kind of nothing there, but it brings up this issue about the lack of coordination and the fact that we're not prepared for an alien invasion. Why would we want to be prepared for an alien invasion? There are no ETs. But it's worse than that, because we can't defend against an alien invasion. And we've known that since the 40s and the 50s. There's nothing we can do other than, I don't know, build bunkers or something, or watch a lot of apocalyptic television shows so we can prepare for when, the end comes, whatever. There's nothing we can do, and they know that. And it gets worse again, because he is complaining about why there isn't this overarching structure and where they can communicate with each other about sightings and things like that. And the question being, well, why haven't they got that? There's two things that one might think about. One, they may have all that, but it's completely classified, and he can't get to it. And the idea that an inspector general of the DOD can't get to it is not shocking to anybody that knows this field at all, or something else. They have known from early on there is nothing they can do about these ET craft, where they go, how they go. You can track them for a little bit, boom, and then they're gone, right? They can do what they want, when they want, how they want. There's nothing that we can do about it. But they don't crash into our airplanes. They're not creating havoc in the airspace, though that issue is raised as a political way to get the issue forward. And so why go to the trouble to create some advanced communications scheme of telling each other what's going on, because there's not a damn thing you can do about it anyway. And that's probably the reason why that interconnecting structure that he's complaining about. But all of this is a distraction. But it is legitimate pushback. I didn't think it would get this bad, but it's starting to get bad. Is it going to succeed? No, it is not going to succeed. This is not 1969, when a report from a university with all the footnotes and everything is basically saying, look, there's just no evidence and whatever. And the government, which had complete control of Project Blue Book, and just shut it down. And NICAP was a sitting duck and blow it away. It's 1969. This is not that now. And Kirkpatrick is not going to be the Edward Condon of the 21st century. MUFON is not going to be destroyed by the CIA. It's going to thrive, because the massive interest in this subject that has been growing for decades and is now at the highest level ever, the amount of media coverage on this, which is the highest level ever. 1,900 articles last year, triage from 4,000. We're on a pace to 2,000 articles this year, triage from 4,000, all up on my website, Print Media Archive. Go read them all. The amount of witnesses that have come forward, the amount of briefing that's happened in Congress, that's not going to go away. And the massive social media that allows billions of people to express their opinions and tell the government how angry it is not going away. And that social media is about to savage Sean Kirkpatrick. And that bothers me, right? Because over the years, I have seen good men, good women in my government, which isn't all evil, isn't run by the Illuminati, right? I understand people are angry and they want to take the entire government and make it a bunch of devils, which is not going to help anybody and is totally bogus. I've seen them made fools of. Whether it was Colonel Haynes giving the press conference in 1997 at the DOD to a bunch of media and the last-ditch efforts to sort of hold off all the massive interest developing in Roswell, when he comes out and resupports the multi-million-dollar report shepherded by Sheila Widnall, the Secretary of the Air Force, in which they make this huge case for the mogul balloon. The mogul balloon was what it was. No, it wasn't. Right? And then, because things were getting a little intense back then, he needed to deal with those bodies that people kept talking about. And so he put forward the crash test dummy explanation, which even the press there at the time raised their hand and pointed out, Colonel Haynes, look, didn't the crash test dummies not be dropped until 1950s? How is it that people are saying they saw these bodies in the 1940s? And his response was time compression. He made a complete ass of himself, a complete ass of the Air Force, 1997. I feel sorry for the guy. You can watch the video. It's up there. Right? And of course, Sheila Widnall, who was a fine Secretary of the Air Force, the first woman to be such, a brilliant woman, had to throw her legacy down the drain by helping to support a report that was complete crap and cost millions of dollars in order to push back against Clinton's desire to get the files. And as you go forward in time, one national security person or military person after another who just wants to protect the United States government from all enemies, foreign and domestic, has had to make complete asses of themselves in support of this truth embargo. Well, Sean Kirkpatrick is the latest victim. Now, the IG of the DOD, what he did, it's not that bad, though it's ridiculous. Okay. And the raising of the possibility we don't really have the necessary means to defend against an alien presence, not the worst thing you can say, right? But let me speculate about Sean Kirkpatrick for a second. There's only a couple of explanations for what happened. One, Sean Kirkpatrick, who probably has no idea who Richard Dolan is, or certainly did when he came into the job, was asked to take over this developing process and be the director of AARO. I don't know what they told him. They might have said, Dr. Kirkpatrick, AARO is being set up to finally get to the bottom of this and sort through the evidence and show what this phenomena is or isn't. And we want you to run that office. And because he didn't know jack about the history of this issue, he's going, yeah, I think we probably should do that. We really need to do that. And so a man who had a very good career takes over that job thinking that's what it's about. It wasn't. It was never about that. As I have said, probably 300 times over the last 4 or 5 years on so many podcasts, I cannot count. AARO, UAP task force, AARO, the 4 tranches of legislation, right? All of the briefings that have been happening on the Hill, right? All of this never had anything to do with the U.S. government deciding probably we need to find out what the hell is going on up there. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was to set up the infrastructure that they knew they had to have in place when the inevitable took place. And the president of the United States, either because Xi Jinping did it first and he had to follow because he had no choice, or was able to do it first because the Senate did its job and got those hearings out of the Senate Intel Committee. When that announcement came and we entered the post-disclosure world, they would be able to service what would be an overwhelming, gargantuan need and desire on the part of billions of people, not just to mention the population of the United States, to say, hello, well, what do you know? And we want to know now. And we want to know this, and we want to know that, and we expect you to start bringing things out. And what's the legal basis for this, and how are the witnesses going to be handled, and all of that stuff. If that wasn't in place, it would be chaos. But the dilemma they had was they had to set up all the structure, which didn't have to take as many years as it did. But as we probably noted before, the world is in chaos and heading towards hell in a handbasket, and so it makes it a little hard to get things done. In fact, basically, our United States government can't get anything done. But I'll tell you, one of the things we probably made the best progress on in the last years would be the disclosure process. It's moving along. And one of the reasons for that is it's acknowledged by both sides. This is truly nonpartisan, and you don't have to take a political position. And so we can hold hands and work together. And they are. It's great. And so it's making progress. All right. But again, it was not set up for that purpose. It was set up for the post-disclosure situation that is coming. And if Sean Kirkpatrick didn't know that, if he didn't get it, because he probably doesn't listen to my podcast, right, or podcast appearances, he's sitting there going, I don't get this. I don't get it. He complained in the article, well, we had all this staff and we acquired all this. And I'm going, really? I mean, most of the time he didn't even have any money. And he claimed in a podcast that they researched, I think it was said in the podcast that he researched all of the sighting events that reported back to 47. Really? But in any event, what he came to conclude is that there's a cabal of, we know they're believers in the public sector, true believers, the tropes that were used in the old days are now suddenly reemerging. I'll get back to that in a second. But there's in fact this insider group of believers that all along have been the ones that have been orchestrating all this going forward. Because he thinks that there's really nothing there, and that he was put in that job to show there was nothing there. And in fact, he wasn't. He was made the mayor of a Potemkin village. He had to be the director of an office that really didn't have a mandate. It had to have a pretend mandate because they couldn't set up AARO and say, yeah, the reason we got to get AARO set up and get the structure going and get some funding and get this legislation passed is because when the president finally confirms the ET presence to y'all good people, we got to be ready to deal with that. They can't say that because that's basically disclosure, right? So they have to do it as a ruse in a sense. They can't actually say why. And that makes it awkward. And that's how you get victims. That's how people get screwed. And Sean Kirkpatrick got really screwed. So he finally can't take it anymore because it doesn't make sense. He quits, he walks away, and in his anger, he puts out these messages. He went on a podcast. I hope to God he stops doing that. Do not do any more podcasts, Sean. That's one explanation. There is another explanation. I hope to God that is not the answer to this question. Sean Kirkpatrick was approached and said, Sean, look, we've got to hold off this thing for a while. We got to get some stuff done because the truth embargo is collapsing. The dam's going to break. The water's going to be raging down the river. They're all going to drown. We need you to become the director of AARO. We need you to hang in there for a while, do whatever you want to do. And then we want you to quit and just completely throw a monkey wrench in everything, just like Edward Condon, right? And so when you quit and say, hey, I was there, there's no evidence for this. The evidence that is out there is bogus. There's a cabal of believers that are doing it. And therefore, really, man, just forget it. You be our Edward Condon, right? And then we'll be able to start shutting stuff down or whatever the hell, I don't know. I really don't think that is it. But if it is, God help Sean Kirkpatrick. There is no other explanation for this. Because if you know the history of this issue, as so many people do now, and you read that Scientific American piece, it is just sad. It's sad. And yet I have to tell you, in the last kind of 7 or 8 years of my life, which is kind of reaching its end, I have seen my government do things that I didn't think was possible. I've seen nothing but sadness is coming to me. I mean, I was sad during the Vietnam War. I was sad during the Iraq War, but there's a certain quality about what's happening lately that is even more, I don't know, painful to watch. What can I say? All right. So this is more of that. So what is the point here? What do you need to know? The effort by the contractors to somehow push the tide and prevent it from coming in, the actions of Dr. Kirkpatrick will not end this issue, will not end the truth embargo. The IG report is not that big a deal. but it does raise the idea of alien invasion, which does what? Give some people within the government an excuse to say, hey, hold off here. We can't do the truth embargo. I mean, hey, we're not ready for an alien invasion yet. And that's a really upsetting thing. And as we know, the people can't handle the truth. And so let's just get back to where we were, keep working on that anti-alien invasion stuff, right? So when we finally announce the ET presence, we can say there's an ET presence here. But let me tell you, if they screw around with us, we can blow them all the way back to Alpha Centauri. No, that's not going to happen. And so what I expect to see is we're going to go through a kind of an awkward period for a while. And one of the things that's going to make it awkward is that there are plenty of, well, the media has been doing an extraordinary coverage and a wonderful job. There are still plenty of people in the journalistic world who hate this whole issue, right? Actually believe that there's no ETs here and probably the world is flat, who are going to seize on this to emerge. And it's already happening. And a perfect example is Peter Bergen, who's a pretty high-level person at CNN, just wrote an opinion piece on CNN. It's one of the dumbest, stupidest things I've ever read in my life. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He has to study the history, but he's seizing on what just happened. And not only is he making the dumb statements, but he's bringing forth the tropes. In case you haven't noticed, right? We're going through an era where language that used to be simply unacceptable is now back in play. Yeah, no problem. Say what you want. It's okay. Now he's doing the same thing. Believers, true believers, ice cream lickers, things like that are turning up in the media, which I follow very closely. It is basically a license to those that just hate the truth embargo and all the people that want the truth and really maybe believe that there's no chance in hell there's ETs here to come out and pull all that language up again and start shoving it out the door. It's not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is because, in spite of its drawbacks and flaws, in spite of the difficulties of dealing with social media and its problems, because it is an incredibly challenging new tech that we're not handling well, social media is the most powerful collective technology ever created that technology ever created that allows collective power to amalgamate so that not just thousands, not just millions, but tens and even hundreds of millions of people can express their views and or their concerns. It's very expensive to get 1 million people to march on Washington. It costs practically nothing to get 100 million people to march on Washington on the internet. And the internet is going to rip this attempt to pieces. It's going to strip it down and sweep it out the door. But it's still going to be a bit of a fight. I have no intention of giving up. None of my colleagues have any intention of giving up. And we're going to win. But here's the final thing I want to say. And I've said this many times. It's not like most of the last 76 years. Right now, we're in existential times. The most existential times that I've experienced in my life, more existential than during the Vietnam War, where we were bombing the hell out of North Vietnam just beneath the Chinese border, and they had nukes, right? It's more existential than that. We are this close to real disaster. And don't take my word for it. You can't follow the news, which I do every single day. Some commentator, some writer, some very knowledgeable, smart person is pointing out that we're in deep trouble. And we are. And so for me, and it's a bias, I don't see any way out of this mess except disclosure. If we're going to avoid a nuclear war, we have got to have disclosure. If we're going to avoid terrorist attacks of a level they're going to trigger government responses that are going to be awful, including possibly nuclear, we have got to have disclosure. And we're about to have election in this country that is going to be awful in ways that most people cannot describe. They're not going to have the words to describe how awful this election is going to be. And what's going to come from it, I have no idea. it's political chaos. And it's going to kind of freeze up the politics in this country while the world is going to hell. We're not going to do anything about it because we're going to be busy running a 10-ring circus. We call it a political campaign. But if the Senate Intel Committee will just call the witnesses into Washington, put them in front of them, and ask them important questions for a week, and let them under oath give the testimony that myself and many of my colleagues know exactly what it's going to be, some of which has already been written up 30 years ago. It's been around for decades, but there's still people alive that are prepared to take an oath who serve their country and confirm it. All they have to do is call that hearing, and the president will be able to disclose. And whatever the hell happens the rest of this year in the political chaos and circus that's coming, or how we're going to deal with Ukraine, or what's going to happen in the Middle East, at least the thinking and the decision process will be based in a world where everybody that's trying to decide what to do knows, guess what? We're not the only civilization in the universe. Star-to-star travel is possible. We have ETs engaging us now. There's unlimited possibilities for the future. All we have to do is not blow ourselves to hell, right? The galaxy is before us. We're not alone. All of that creates a whole new possible future that might affect abilities people decide, do I want to blow this up? Do I want to kill this many thousand people? Do I want to launch a nuke here because I want to be the next czar of Russia? Do I want Taiwan that badly so I can take over their computer chip manufacturing, though I may have to kill 1 million Taiwanese? All of this will be decided in a world where everybody that's doing the deciding knows that we're not alone in it. That is my thoughts today. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. You were very gracious in the way you took on the energy that I started the conversation with about what's going on in the Middle East. And I think the story that you told and the conclusions that you're drawing about the possibility that the encounter with the extraterrestrials is exactly what humanity needs to save ourselves from ourselves by coming into a realization that we are not alone is the reason why I'm in Washington, D.C.
That's right.
The reason why you're doing what you're doing. I think we all have a deepening belief that this may be the only issue left that would bring humanity into a single narrative for the same reason at the same time, and thereby may be able to give us the redemption that we all seek from a world that is hard to take in as we witness the news day by day. And I also appreciate and just want to acknowledge your relentless perseverance, my friend, over decades now on this issue. You're one of the most relentlessly optimistic people I know working on disclosure. And I just want to acknowledge it and thank you for it. It's a remarkable testament of character that you can just keep on. You know, it's the audacity of hope, as Martin Luther King used to say. You've embodied that, and I've been inspired by it, just as your friend and colleague. So I just wanted to state
Thank
that for our community. And
let's be clear. Let's be clear, Jim. The justice activists, the human rights activists, like yourself and others, have been on the activist road longer than I. I mean, the effort, anti-war and activist movement, right? Do you know how far back that goes? The civil rights movement. I had a 26-year run, while the truth embargo is 76 years old. The real activist effort to engage it really doesn't start until about the mid-1990s. And so, believe me, compared to other activist movements, it's been not that big a deal. So I want to acknowledge the fact that that we have a long way to go before we start equaling the kind of perseverance
Yeah.
and commitment that other activists in even more challenging issues, in my view, have had to go through. And
Well, we're all dwarfs standing on the shoulders of giants, as Saint Benedict said in the 12th century. So I appreciate that, and it doesn't detract at all from the work that you're doing, and many people in the UFO UAP movement are doing. And I wanted to, just as we draw to a close, just get your sense of priorities for any of our global audience that want to get involved. You mentioned the imperative of further hearings by the U.S. Senate and U.S. House of Representatives. I know on the New Paradigm Institute website, like yours, we're delivering one call to action after another, urging people to contact their senator, contact their congressional representative, and urge them to support UAP disclosure and further hearings on this matter. But I just would love to have you say more about that in terms of what you would call on our community to do.
On the New Paradigm Institute, you've set up one of these classic modules, which it makes it very cool to be able to contact your representative, whoever you are, every state, right? The Senate, your representative, and your senators. That's fine. What I've created, though, is a very focused approach on this. And that is at a website called I created called shiftstorm.org, shiftstorm.org. And what I've done there is it provided basic instructions how the 1.5, and it doesn't have to be in this country, all over the world, the 1.5 billion Twitter users, X users, it's always going to be Twitter to me. They can send messages to the three people that really hold the decision about holding the Senate intel hearings for the witnesses in their hands, and that is Senator Schumer, Senator Warner, and Senator Rubio. Okay, these three people.
Good point.
Really are the ones.
Good point. Those are the key ones. Key players.
And so, but can you write them letters? No. Can you send them emails? Yeah, and the email forms are there. But if you're not a member of, if you're not a resident of the state that they serve, and you don't put in a state address in that state that's legitimate and a zip code, it won't go through. But if you do, it will go through. So I expect, a decent number of emails to go into their accounts, to be seen by the staffers, to come to their attention. And these emails should be calling for these hearings. We want these hearings. We want them as soon as possible. Throw in some nice praise. We love what you've been doing. We really appreciate your effort to get that major bill passed. Sorry, it got gutted, but you can reintroduce it, whatever. But the real action is Twitter. And so what you learn on that page is, if you're on Twitter, you can send a tag tweet to these three gentlemen. And if you change the language, you could send 10 different versions of it to each one, whatever, right? And so it's at Senator Schumer, whatever the handle is, which is there. Senator, I want you to hold these hearings. Please call the hearings in the Senate. We have witnesses ready to testify. Whatever you want to say along those lines, and you fire that baby off. And all of those tagged tweets to Schumer, Rubio, and Warner will accumulate in their notification box of their Twitter account. And they all have Twitter accounts. And these notification boxes are monitored by staffers. And when they start seeing thousands of these tagged messages coming in about, hey, we want those hearings, they're going to call the boss and say, look, we got something going here. And the senator will go to the Twitter account, check the notifications, and start scrolling through all these messages. It's the one thing we can do. Trying to, buttonhole them in the hallway when they go to lunch. No. March on Washington is not going to happen, right? Letters, painful, slow, not a number, right? Emails, if you can get them in, absolutely. All the emails you can. But Twitter, God knows Twitter X is still one of the greatest activist tools that ever turned up. And so that's what I am doing. Can I get in front of any of these men? Boy, I want to, and I'm trying. But I'm not a journalist. I've been an activist for 26 years. And for those of you who know anything about activists, we tend not to make friends with authority. Really, and even the media. It's like, you pains in the ass. You won't shut up. You won't go away. You won't leave us alone. And it's even worse because you're right. And if you were wrong, we would be irritated with you. But you're right. And that makes us much more irritated with you. So leave us alone. It is not easy to be an activist in general. That doesn't mean that you can't interact with Congress. But this issue, when you throw in the fact that this is the UFO issue, it's not easy. However, people are getting up on the Hill because they're coming at the Hill from different directions. Ron James has gotten some interviews up there. I'm hoping I can get up on the Hill and talk to some of these people directly, not to one of their teenage interns. Not that I have anything against interns. But why do I want to sit in front of Senator Schumer or even Congressman Burchett or certainly Congressman Raskin, who is my congressman? Why would I want to sit in front of them? What have I got to say to them that somebody else couldn't tell them? It's what I just told you. What every one of them needs to hear, whether they figured it out or not, and I think some of them have not, even though they're trying, is that this whole 7-year process has nothing to do with, oh, I think we need to find out what's going on up there in the sky. It is preparation for disclosure, which they know they're running out of time and the president is going to have to do it. And if they go through all of this, it's going to make the post-disclosure world much easier to conduct. It's also going to save them a little face for simply doing the right thing. And so therefore, it is not quite what it seems. Do they get that? Do they understand that? Nobody is going on Fox News and saying this. Nobody's going on any of those networks and saying this. There's people going on and saying some important things. Gary Nolan, I love this guy, who has created a think tank called Soul. He's gone on the show and said, yeah, I'm 100% certain there's ETs here. That's not the message that I'm talking about. I'm happy to say on any show there's ETs here. I've been saying it for 25 years. That's not the message. The message is, folks, don't you understand that what is happening is not what it is presented as, and that's by intention. They have no choice. They can't acknowledge the ET presence, only it's being acknowledged indirectly through Grush, through Schumer, and so forth. We can't formally acknowledge why we're doing this. We have to act like we're doing it because we want to find out. And that's driving a lot of people crazy, but it's the political way it has to happen. That's the way it is in this life. Diplomacy requires things like this. You go to some country to try to work out a deal, you lie through your teeth, but you get the deal and things get better. Whatever. They're not getting that message. And they're certainly not willing to say it. And I understand that. Schumer can't come out and say, look, there's ETs here. I've always known it. We need to get this bill passed so we can get ready to deal with telling the people. He can't say that, even if he believes it. That's the message I would like to convey to these people, not to give them a hard time. And I'll finish with this. There is a reason why this message needs to get to them, and it's a reason why this message needs to get to the American people. Is this. They've been lied to for 76 years. They've been lied to so many times that they've now lost virtually faith in all government institutions. Everybody's corrupt. Everybody's evil. Nobody working for the government can be trusted. Everything. FBI, CIA, the Department of Defense, the Department of Agriculture. Nobody can be trusted, and therefore the government should be completely, blown up, start over. In other words, we're breaking down because fundamental trust in government's breaking down. In a democracy, that's fatal. That's like getting, the plague. And so the ending the truth embargo will be the most profound act of government truth-telling ever. It's going to really improve relationships between the people and the government. But the unfortunate thing is they have to lie their way to it. They can't be truthful about the process, okay? And so that's kind of a catch-22. And all I'm trying to say is if the people understood that, if they understood why they're misrepresenting it in this particular case, then when the truth finally comes out, they're going to be less upset. In other words, it makes it more understandable and authentic. In other words, they're going to say, look, you are authentically lying to us in service to getting to a far more important truth. I respect the fact you have to do that. I understand it, and that is going to make the outcome better. Because if they don't do that, when disclosure finally comes and they look back, they're going to say the whole damn setup was a lie. AARO was a lie. All the things you were saying back, you were lying again. You just can't stop lying. It just kind of takes a lot of the juice, the good stuff, out of the process. And so I want to make it more authentic so people understand what is happening and not learning later they were led down another road that was just a play to manipulate them so we could finally tell you the truth. And so now, yeah, there's ETs here. Don't give us a hard time about it. Don't criticize us. Just move on with your lives. You finally got the truth. Now shut up and go away. No, no. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I've been putting this message out. I'm not
Good.
condemning them for these lies. I'm saying I understand why you have to do it that way. Apparently, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick did not.
Mm. Well, Steve, thank you. Thank you so much for this. And it's so comforting to know there are people of your caliber working on this issue as colleagues with me and the many others that we work with on a regular basis. Can you join the after chat?
Of course.
For those who want to continue the conversation, you received the link in your Zoom invite. And so we'll bring it to a close at the moment, everyone, but you can join Steve in the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box
Okay.
that Stan just put in. So you can just click that and you'll go to the after chat. And you also received it in your Zoom reminder for today. And then we'll see everybody tomorrow for a conversation with Jeff Dunn, who is the founder of the International Consciousness Research Labs, which is the successor to the Princeton University Engineering Anomalous Research Lab. And we're going to look at the phenomenon of what does it mean if that something is anomalous? What is unidentified anomalous phenomena? What does anomalous mean? So that's going to be our Humanity Rising session for tomorrow. So thank you, Steve, very much. We'll see you in the after chat, and we'll see everybody else tomorrow on Humanity Rising.
And I'll be on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie tonight at 10 p.m. Pacific time.
Cool. Coast to Coast tonight with Steve Bassett, 10 p.m. Pacific.